Esta conferencia comenzará a grabarse.
Welcome everybody to this new session of the European Alliance Against Coronavirus. Thank you for joining us, and an important message: this session is being recorded, and if you stay with us, you are accepting that we will share it both in the channels of the European Cluster Alliance and in the European Cluster Collaboration Platform, ECCP. So, say that today we are returning to a highly relevant topic, okay, the green aspect of our objectives, our goals, our common goals across Europe, okay, and concretely to the environmental management systems, the sustainability standards across clusters. And I need to say a big thank you to Adrian Brown from Arctic Values, a very active member of this forum, and Daniel Wong from the Ascorn company, okay, well, I don't know, I suppose it's a company, yes, for sharing with us their approaches and their knowledge on this topic. And after hearing them, we will, as always, open the floor for a common discussion. And I want to, from the beginning, encourage all the attendants to contribute with their questions, comments, and ideas. So, thank you again, Adrian, and I will give you the floor. So, would you prefer that I present, or?
If it works, I can share the screen, my screen.
Let's try it. Yes, we are seeing it.
Okay. And I go into presentation mode.
Perfect. Thank you.
You can see it. Okay. I hope it's moving. So yeah, thank you very much, Antonio, Nina, for the invitation, and hello everybody. Good morning from Finnish Lapland, where I'm based and where I'm doing the large majority of my work. And to briefly introduce myself, so yeah, I'm Adrian. Some of you know me already from a previous session and last autumn, where I talked about sustainable investments. And well, yeah, I'm running my own business, and I'm also a researcher and university lecturer, and I'm working largely with issues around sustainability. And this is why I also like to introduce and to discuss with you today the topic of environmental management systems and to what extent they may be of relevance for clusters. So I personally highly believe that they are of relevance as we perceive everywhere that we have ideas shifting towards sustainable development, towards circular economy. And yeah, just my intention is now just to introduce briefly the topic, or just encourage also to further thinking for those of you who are already familiar with it. And within this perspective, I yeah, will embrace the overall topic of corporate social responsibility and link these environmental management systems to specific standards. So yeah, so as I said, so environmental management systems belong also under the to the concept of corporate social responsibility. Possibly we can also discuss later on a bit further to what extent CSR matters for you in the clusters across Europe. But what I intend to introduce are these standards, the ISO 14001. That's a very international perspective from the International Organization for Standardization, and also discuss this, what originally was coined by the European Commission, the EMAS standard, Eco-Management and Audit Scheme. So we have the logos here on the bottom right corner. So what our environmental management systems are about? So these are simplified said policy tools that could be implemented into organizations or companies, or also in a wider perspective, clusters could utilize them, of course, as companies, organizations, sometimes also academic entities, are part of the clusters, as you know, of course, very well. But elements of these environmental management systems are to really implement a standardized strategic approach, how to address all the environmental challenges that go along with the business activities or organizational activities that are inside companies and organizations. So it's about having the implementation of an internal policy, action plans to document systems. And I'm rushing a bit through this because, yeah, of course, in the morning session, cannot go comprehensively into all the aspects, but there's an idea just to introduce it for today. Very important are the ideas of being more efficient in everything that is being done. And this is very often the idea of being efficient with the materials and resources that go into the operations. And of course, what I think is also of relevance for everyone is to reduce the costs, so particularly the unnecessary costs. And here these environmental management systems may help. So how does it work from the policy tool perspective? And I'm linking that first to the ISO standard, the ISO 14001. So this follows largely the approach of PDCA. So this embraces 4 phases that stands for plan, do, check, and act. So, and the overall idea is to having these 4 phases in a specific cycle. And this cycle could run very normally for around 1 year, and then it restarts again. And the idea is about really to continually improve all the processes. So it means if somebody implements the ISO 14001 standard, for instance, just spring, then it's not the idea that this autumn all the operations are already perfect, because this is very likely not possible. But the main idea is to, over the years to come, that there are ideas to really to identify what are the shortcomings and what could be done to improve this continually. So to be competitive and to remain competitive in the operations, and overall just to decrease the ecological footprint, what matters, of course, a lot in the whole discussion of sustainable development. So there's first this planning phase, then there's an implementation phase, so really doing something. And what is very important in these standards are also the assessments and audits, that there's really the monitoring that actually something happens, so that it's more than just talking about it, but also that there's implementation and assessment to have really the positive environmental impact eventually. And what is possible also is to receive certificates, and I will say something about this in very few minutes. So the standard is actually, it's quite large content, because it's needed for all these specific matters in all these different sectors and organizations and companies where it's applicable. And just very briefly to share, so there are specific clauses that could link to specific environmental policies, the opportunities, and of course what matters a lot are these environmental indicators, like consumption of water, energy. I have a slide about this also in a moment. And so to talk briefly about the certification process, because I think this is something that's also of relevance, because the environmental management systems, they could implement it inside companies and organizations, not only for the purpose of improving the environmental impact, but it can be also utilized for communication purposes in the end. And I think if organizations, for instance, around the clusters are doing fine, why not just also communicate this with potential new partners, with the network, and of course, when it comes to the business activities, also with potential customers, clients, and also investors. So, so here is also somewhat the path through the certification process, and what the cluster organizations, this particularly I would like to point out, could do is really support its members by just sharing the knowledge, perhaps sharing trainings and so on, and really provide assistance when it comes to the certification process, and just having joint efforts like you do in the clusters so often so well. So, and here is, I think, another specific opportunity to address the sustainability issues in particular. And this is just some very generic examples of how certificates could look like. So they could be utilized for the communication. And another important aspect I still would like to point out in this rather short presentation are the environmental management systems audits. And we can distinguish them between two, the internal and the external audit. And what is of concern is in these ecological aspects are the emissions. So we have, of course, a climate change debate always in focus, to some extent at least, greenhouse gas emissions and other parameters in this perspective. Just waste, for example, plastic waste is often, I think, also across many clusters an issue. So that's how can this be utilized? Are there recycling mechanisms in place? And then, yeah, just some sort of emissions to land, water, air, and the consumption levels of raw materials, energy, natural resources. So these are elements that matters. Of course, this goes much, much further when it comes to the specific environmental indicators, but just a few to mention right now to highlight this. An internal audit, that would be somewhat a first step when this system is going to be implemented. And this could be done really, as the name indicates, by the experts that are around, for instance, inside the cluster, or even when it's just a single company inside this enterprise. And so the internal auditor, it's good if that person, she or he, has also some sort of a training, some sort of, perhaps attended some courses, has knowledge about that, how these environmental management systems work, and how this other thing can be utilized, this whole standard. And in that perspective, it's of relevance to develop this understanding, and also to talk a lot with the other people, with the different positions inside the cluster, inside the business, to really figure out what are our environmental challenges, what are we doing fine, where's room for improvement, and how can we do this over a longer time span. So these auditors, just like as these pictures somewhat indicate, can go around with checklists and really figuring out what is for each specific position and workplace and procedure and process in the operations, what are actually the ecological concerns. And when the internal audit is done, then it can move on to an external auditor. Of course, only the external auditor has the has the opportunity and the possibility to, in the end, to issue the certificate, so that this is in the end an accredited environmental management system that's in place there. And what can usually happen is that these external audits happen once a year. So then so the internal auditor prepares everything, and the external auditor has then the final check and will see if this is really all in line with the standard, and if there is something moving on. So not everything has to be perfect immediately, but there should be this continual improvement process. This is how the standard developers have coined this idea. And to refer to the other standard, the Eco Management and Audit Scheme, first developed in 1993. So I said the European Commission was highly involved into that. And meanwhile, it has been revisioned several times. And it's still a standard that is particularly inside Europe widely recognized. And we can see the overall procedural steps. There are similarities. They also can follow this ideas of planning, do, check, and act. So it's also some sort of a cycle. As I said, it's wise usually to implement this throughout a time span of 1 year, for instance, even though that's not mandatory that it should be 1 year, but that's very often the case. And we can just see this, we can somewhat say that the large cycle here is somewhat this internal check, and then we can go further to the external process that links to the registration by a competent body. So, and these can be national bodies across Europe, for instance. And something that is, as I said, that EMAS standard is developing. So in the past, for a long time, it was like this, that it could be just certified one specific entity, so not the whole company. If a company has, for instance, several factories, several retail stations, and so on, perhaps spread out over a whole region or a whole country, or even fully international. So, but in 2018 they novelized this, and now it's possible to certify multiple entities at once. So, or what they put it here as multiple sites. So headquarters plus other locations that are affiliated to a company. And I think this is also of relevance, of interest for clusters and how they can cooperate and how they can finally certify, possibly together. It is case dependent. So it's not, we cannot generalize if it's just possible for everybody or just for specific entities. So it's very case dependent, but it's becoming much more practical. And in this particular concept, companies can work much better together, and also they can share costs. What is, of course, one of the very positive aspects in this inside the clusters very often, of course, as you know. So to share the costs by building synergies. And here just a very few examples about how different actors could work together to implement the EMAS standard, so this environmental management system. And I found just a few examples. And so, for instance, in Catalonia, there was the municipality. So Barcelona has of course city, but here, as it said, municipality of Barcelona, they were just guiding a group of small and medium-sized enterprises so that they are implementing EMAS. So this is some sort of a joint cooperation. And competent bodies also in Italy and Portugal have worked together, also really to promote EMAS registrations in specific cluster projects. So that's and also in Italy there is somewhat a specific EMAS cluster certificate available. So these are just very regional examples, and it's worth just to look when whatever region someone is operating with its cluster, it makes sense to have a look how this is working in practice. And and then just what I perceive is so that it makes sense to have a look. It is across all levels, as I put it here. So clusters are of course different. Sometimes there's campus clusters, whereas where it's very condensed, of course. Then there can be the regional and national clusters or supranational, just like the European Cluster Alliance. And I think it's applicable to work together in this environmental performance, or regarding the environmental performances of the operations and all these kind of levels. And but when particularly when someone's working for a cluster organization, so being in the overall management of the cluster, then I think it makes sense to provide this sort of trainings, theories, perhaps organizing workshops, and just raising the awareness and showing what is possible and what could be done together. For example, the development of specific checklists, and as I said before, sharing the costs is of course often very attractive, and also having a look if there can be not some sort of synergies working together maybe not the entire cluster, but maybe 2 or 3 members of the cluster that are very close together, have worked in many projects specifically together. Perhaps they can just apply for a certification for an environmental management system, or just implement it themselves. Perhaps even not with just by getting the benefits, but not aiming particularly for certification. That's of course also possible. So whatever is desired in this perspective. Just finally to mention that these environmental management systems, they are particularly have the idea of voluntary implementation. So it's not that it's usually provided by law. So that, and this is, I think, also something interesting that we could possibly discuss a bit further later on. But this was, yeah, just my brief introduction. So just giving everybody some sort of encouragement to think about to what extent environmental management systems make sense inside our own operations. And with this, I thank you for your attention, and happy to discuss it further later on.
You're very welcome, Adrian. As always, clear and very methodological and very useful, as you said. We will come back to you for sure after the speech from Daniel. Now it's time to welcome Daniel Born. Hello, can you hear me? Yes? Okay, perfect. Would you like to present from your computer, or would you prefer to having me presenting?
I would like to share my screen if that's okay, because I had some changes to my slides.
Okay, let's see if it works. Yes, we see it.
You see it?
Yes.
Excellent.
Not in full screen mode yet. Could you put it in full screen?
Yeah.
Now it's perfect. Please go on.
You see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to present a little bit, or give a little introduction on digitalization of environmental management. There's a lot of benefits from it. Just shortly about me, some information. I'm an environmental consultant. I work in a lot of sustainability projects, but mainly environmental management, EMAS ISO 14001 certification process, and so on. I'm also a co-founder of Acorn, which is a firm that provides environmental software. So I work on a lot of digital projects or digitalization projects. One moment. Here. All right. I would like you to just quickly give an overview of the digitalization trends or technologies that we observe. It is expected that there's a lot of benefits for the environmental management. I mean, I'm pretty sure that most of you already heard about augmented reality, automation, big data, blockchain, cloud computing, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. These are all topics that we hear about that are applied in different fields of organizations, but also for the environmental management, there's a lot of benefits expected from it. According to a study, we have this categorization of fields of environmental management here as environmental controlling, environmental compliance, risk management, supply chain management, production itself, stakeholder and collaboration internally, but also externally. So if we go by these fields of environmental management, we see that there's certain benefits. First of all, for the environment, we basically improve the environmental performance of organizations by applying these technologies, but we also help the organization to operate at low costs, to deal with a high number of requirements and become more efficient. And I think what is very important is I've observed that most certified organizations are very innovative, more innovative than others. So I think this can also enhance this innovation process, implementing more digital solutions into the environmental management. When we look at the environmental management system, there's certain tasks to do and maybe even challenges. We're definitely dealing with administration effort for certification, documentation. We have costs related to the whole tracking, for the implementation, for the certification. The complexity is one challenge. Organizations are growing, they have different field operation products, so it can be quite complex. Also what Adrian was talking about before, different locations, different sites, European organization, so can be much more complex than maybe a local organization. We have the frequent evaluation processes, and we have an increasing number of requirements. For example, the European CSR reporting requirements, the CO2 balance requirements, that local or national legal requirements. All this organizations have to comply with, and here there is a lot of aspects of digitalization that can help to face or manage these challenges. For example, mobile work, cloud, visualization, connected work, working in teams, communicating using communication technology, having more assistance in the process, that also maybe less skilled workers or no experts in environmental management can conduct certain work steps, and the automatization in general of the process, especially related to the environmental data that needs to be tracked and evaluated. So if we compare or match the environmental fields of environmental management with the trends we see, or the digital trends, we see not each technology can be applied in each field of the environmental management. And I think it's also important to add that we have certain technologies that are more in a development phase or only applied in certain areas, whereas others, there's a lot of commercial products you can already apply. And so you kind of see here, for example, cloud computing is really becomes an integral part of a lot of processes. I don't want to go through all technologies because I think you all aware of them. I also won't go into all fields of the environment management, but I'd like to give a few examples just to maybe get a better understanding how these trends can support environmental management. For example, we take environmental accounting. We track a lot of information here. Adrian mentioned the core indicators, very important for EMAS, but also ISO 14001 for the whole sustainability reporting. These numbers are very important, or indicators. We have facility machine related or site related information that is environmentally relevant. Also in the whole purchasing process, we have information needs to be checked. So especially if we look at like energy, water, and so on, also in the field of environment management, automation can help a lot with sensors and controlling systems to get a better understanding of the eco balance basically of the organization. If we integrate big data analysis into this process, we can also understand trends better, patterns to increase the resource efficiency, the productivity, and improve the environmental performance of an organization. Internet of Things is also here. Big topics. If we have devices, machines that talk to each other, of course, we can operate more efficiently. So far, most of these things are applied for quality management to reduce costs, but also the environmental benefits can be really huge and very important for the organizations, also in terms of innovation. Another case of environmental compliance is that we have to deal, as I said before, with a large number of obligations, legal obligations, national, European, but also from external parties such as customers that have certain requirements to us or other stakeholders. And on top, we also have our internal obligations such as guidelines, standards. EMAS and ISO itself have a lot of requirements that need to be implemented as part of the environmental management system. Here, there's a lot of cloud-based solutions that provide a lot of information on the actual, where you can use to have information on the actual situation in the organizations and the operation, as well as the matching requirements. So it improves the transparency of basically what has to be done and what are the requirements, legal requirements or other requirements that I have to consider. This, especially for what also Adrian mentioned before, the auditing process, is very important to have all information available. It's much easier to audit the organization and improve the processes and the environmental performance if you actually have information not in a paper-based documentation, but you have them all very handy for the inspection, the frequent inspection, or the annual auditing process. On top, you also have mobile computing, which really helps you to, when you go for a site inspection, and you have all information on your phone, basically, then it helps you to actually better evaluate and understand the situation. So here, this can improve the environmental performance greatly to apply these things. I was mentioning supply chain before. I don't want to go into detail here, but firms have an increasing interest in understanding their supply chain, understanding or evaluating suppliers. There's no new requirements if you're part of a management system or certification, but there's also the new legislation on the supply chain. Germany, for example, has already drafted a law to integrate sustainability criteria into supply chain management. The European Union is also working on legislation in these regards. So what you want is now cloud-based solutions that help you to better understand where is risk, social risk, environmental risk, maybe even material or product-specific evaluation through these platforms, or also a supplier evaluation, so you can actually integrate certain criteria in the contract with your suppliers. So we really try to be more transparent and avoid risks regarding the supply chain. Blockchain technology is something that's still only applied in certain fields, and it's still more in a development phase. But for raw material depletion, for example, it is used to basically have a flow, or can have a transparency of the raw material from origin till it's actually used in a product. So it's kind of a compliance in that sense too, but basically refers to the supply chain. I think the whole idea of using platforms for educational purposes is not really new, but there's an increasing number of interesting products, also social networks, to provide essential information on the environmental management, to provide or gain awareness among staff members regarding the environment, the issues, and to even conduct mandatory environmental training. So I think there's a lot of commercial tools out there or free platforms, but I think using social networks and other types of platforms, to generalize it a little bit, is very beneficial and can really improve the environmental awareness and communicating environmental topics within organizations, and maybe with partners or even customers. Yeah, we've seen this chart before. The best would be to digitalize the whole process in environmental management system. I mean, this is a representative for most environmental management process flows, but it's referring specifically for EMAS, but they all go through this circle, and ideally would digitize the whole process. However, most tools usually focus on certain aspects. For example, you start at the end, there's reporting, a lot of reporting tools, but there's maybe not so many tools for the first step, for the initial environmental review, for example. So we find no tool that usually covers the whole process, which is kind of, I guess, still a challenge. I just want to give you an example of how this is a tool that was developed at the University of Applied Sciences in Stuttgart. I was involved in this process. This is now applied to several firms, And this is specifically a cloud computing based solution that helps with the initial environmental review, but also the continuous checks and inspections, as well as the internal audit that we were talking about. So the idea here is, I mentioned before checklists, and most organizations use checklists, which is, I think, a very accepted and effective way. But with digitalization now, we can have actually digital checklists. And if we combine this with like mobile solution, cloud-based solution, we can gain much greater benefits than just paper-based checklists. For example, here we have a tool that visualizes the information by tapping on the screen and the building floor plan. You can enter a point that includes a lot of information and also profiles. So you enter all your observations on environmental management, your aspects, your risks, your dangers, your tasks, and you also have profiles that help you to evaluate the situation better. So it really speeds up the whole process. And this is, I think, where you can really reduce the costs when implementing an environmental management system by applying very simple tools that help documenting quickly, evaluating quickly, and sharing all the information between all members quickly. And I think this is also something that is interesting for clusters, because there's a lot of group approaches in Germany where several firms jointly implement environmental management system, which is also funded. And here it really helps to use one tool often to train and everyone how to use it. And then this is a very effective and a very low-cost approach. I think that's why this could be very interesting for clusters. Just to give you a little outlook at the end, ideally, as I said, the whole process would be somehow digitally supported. I'm working with other partners on the idea of having a platform that supports the whole process, also integrates educational information, requirements, or the whole development of the European Green Deal, sustainable development goals, and then supports the whole process of implementing a management system and providing the different tools. This is just, something I work on, and I thought I quickly mention it because maybe something like that will be available. There's a lot of support already from the European EMAS websites and maybe the national or local sites. There's a lot of tools, mostly Excel-based or Microsoft Word, but more and more tools become available for free, and I hope we can all benefit from that. So the number of certificates organizations will increase, and thereby we also improve the environmental performance and of organizations. That would be the target behind that, basically. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you, and I'm happy to discuss or answer questions.
You are very welcome, Daniel. Thank you to you. Okay, so now it's time to open the floor for the attendance. And I think the first one is Jaime. Jaime, will you share your question? We are not hearing you. I see that you have your micro activated, but we are not hearing you, Jaime. Okay, I suppose that Jaime is having problems, so I will read the question in the chat, okay? It's to Adrian. It is important in this topic of the CSR to have good practices and develop public demonstration actions involving different stakeholders to create a culture of sharing and mobilization. From your experience, how do you see these actions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jaime. This is actually an always accurate and always important question in so many matters. So the stakeholders, and I personally consider this topic always as very relevant. I already can mention from the terminology. So when we are going into these standards, So that's not exactly the answer to your question, but it's good to mention first, and then I come to your question most precisely. So when we go to the standards, then it is often that they not only refer to the stakeholders, but that they call them interest parties. So this is when we're looking into the standard ISO 14001. This is what they're mentioning, and like so often in English language, we have the same idea, but the terminology is very wide. So and considering the stakeholders, the interested parties, I think also it's important to look around all the time and working together. So I mean, when we have this topic of corporate social responsibility, it's in the past we have seen a lot, often with resource extraction companies and in these industries, that there were a lot of conflicts about land uses, about pollution of water bodies, of the soils, and so on. And so on the other hand, it's a possibility really to take the stakeholders at hand, to have these community meetings, to discuss together. So because when somebody is somewhat in the same region, same communities, companies, and just the stakeholders around, so that's very important to discuss with them. And I like the way you put it here with culture of sharing and mobilization, because this is how perhaps as a corporate actor, even possibly if it's also a regional cluster, has of course could be somewhat take a bit the leadership role here, and working then perhaps together with community authorities and organizing meetings, and then really to discuss together what is the path to approach. So and here these environmental management systems, they are also a good tool, because with this the companies can build transparency and also credibility. So we are implementing an environmental management system. This is our performance. Maybe we are not perfect, but we are on our path. And this is maybe everything stakeholders just asking for. And of course, we can think about further than just the communities around, but we can think about environmental activists. We can think about investors, business partners. Of course, the stakeholder universe is always very wide. And possibly even from the stakeholder universe, when we're thinking about clusters, maybe the one or the other will be encouraged just to join the cluster, maybe founding a startup and saying, okay, we would like to join this cluster. Maybe there is potential for growth in the cluster that will strengthen everybody. So there's so many opportunities, and I could talk maybe for much longer, but this is basically I share very much the idea, and it's important to communicate with stakeholders on a frequent base, and this can avoid these conflicts. So yeah, that would be my answer and few thoughts about that. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Adrian. Daniel, will you act to the ideas, your comments? You're muted, Daniel, sorry. No, we are not hearing you because you are muted.
Sorry, yeah,
No.
But just because my volume is so low. You were asking if I have anything to add to it, I guess.
Any comment on this question on the chat?
And not specifically to the part.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, any other question or comment from the audience?
I was wondering, Daniel, Adrian, do you have any data on how many companies, entities in Europe are actually implementing these environmental management system? How widely is it spread? Or is there a tendency that it's growing or decreasing?
Daniel, would you like to take this one, or shall I?
Yeah, the EMAS registry is a public registry. There's that you can find on the EU sites. I don't know the number for all over Europe. In Germany, it's I think it's 1,200 organizations with like 2,000 sites. Then there's a lot of member states that have significantly more organizations registered, and also member states with way less. It has a bit to do with the framework in the specific member states. ISO 14001 is a much lower standard, but it is an international standard, so the numbers are much higher than like the 100,000s in European Union. But I'm really like trying to always promote EMAS as the much higher standard because it gives you much more compliance. All these the EMAS auditors are public verifiers. They actually check the compliance with the European legislation and the national legislation. So it gives you a lot of like risk management aspects. It covers a lot of that, and it's also promoted by the European Union, which means there's a lot of benefits. I can mainly always talk about Germany. For example, in Germany, you have less energy-related tax to pay. You have a facilitated process for registering a new machine if you are EMAS registered, for example, in terms of emissions or wastewater. So yeah, maybe I'm going now beyond the number of questions, but I'm just saying the EMAS register is relatively small, but these are very, I would call them always, I would call them the premium organizations in terms of environmental management, because they do quite a big effort to become leaders in environmental management, and they're very recognized. It's why they often receive awards. So my suggestion would be, if anyone is interested, I would always follow the EMAS path, unless it's an organization that works very much internationally.
Thank you, Daniel. Okay, we see the graph in the screen, okay, from the official website, and there are clearly big differences between countries, okay. I don't know, Germany, Italy, even Spain has around 1,000 organizations, sorry. But for example, Poland has only 65. So it's why that kind of differences? What would be the explanation? Would you share with us?
Yeah. Mark, yes. Oh.
Okay, Daniel, go ahead, please.
Okay. It's often the framework between these countries. As I said, one aspect in Germany is, for example, tax reductions, but also the support level and the level of recognition. I mean, of course, we have to take in consideration the size of the different member states. Some countries are simply smaller, so in percentage, for example, Austria has a higher percentage of EMAS organizations than Germany in percentage of the number of organizations in this country. And it's kind of also something how how it's marketed in the different countries. It's very popular in some regions and less popular in others. And there's a lot of promotion from the government side in some countries, and others there's not. This is the main explanation, I would say. And maybe there's also some national competing standards that are very accepted by the organizations, and there's no need for an EMAS standard.
Okay, I can understand that if there are tax reduction related to the certification, for sure it will encourage or not the application of this kind of standards.
Yeah,
okay,
plays a big role, but I think it's also I think Adrian listed before the different EMAS clubs and regional organizations, and in some regions they promote very much EMAS, and there's a lot of infrastructure or support, which makes it much easier to start the process.
Perfect. Dolores, welcome, Dolores. How are you?
Good morning, Fine. Good morning. Hello, everyone. I have a question more related to, well, it's for both, for Daniel and Adrian. For the greenhouse gases are three scopes. We can say that the direct one related to a company, the indirect ones more related to the energy that you are using, but also then the third scope that is more related to all the activities, the indirect activities that involve all the stakeholders of the ecosystem that is operating with the company. And activities can be downstream and upstream. So in this case, extrapolating the scope 3 not only for the greenhouse gases, that can be also for water, for all the items that are interpelling the sustainability and the CSR. These methodologies and these tools, how can be adapted? Because I suppose, so I figure out that it's much more difficult when you are involving not only 1, 2, 3, 4 partners, if not really an ecosystem of companies that are affecting your activity. I don't know if I'm clear or not. Sorry.
Well, yeah, thank you, Dolores. I think I have quite also many thoughts about this, and I think it links also to this somewhat stakeholder management when it comes to the ecological performance and what you mentioned, particularly the greenhouse gas emissions and the whole approach towards the climate crisis. And indeed, so if somebody is implementing environmental management systems, I fully agree that should be not just stop at the premises. For instance, if it's a regular product, for instance, for households in the end, for private households, but they should consider also what the product in the end, what kind of emissions it will produce, and energy consumption when we're just thinking about the regular refrigerator. So what kind of energy levels are there? Because energy in the end, very often, so large parts of energy still coming from conventional sources, so not from renewable ones. So still contributing to larger greenhouse gas emissions. So it's important to have a look into all these layers. And I think that these standards, EMAS even further than ISO 14001, but the indicators are quite specific. The content is large, and if this standard is implemented, so to say, fully, so comprehensively, and if there's due diligence in the whole process, also by the internal auditors and by the external auditors in the end, so it's possible to address all these different layers. So going beyond really their own premises, even though they are first and foremost in the focus immediately, but later on having these interested parties, what are the stakeholders, that they are also in the focus. That's so it shouldn't stop there. So and everyone who is implementing is the environmental manager, so to say, in any premise, in any company. So should have this in mind. So that will be my response. Yeah, but good point. Anything to add, Daniel?
I think it's just always important to add that this external auditor, as a public auditor, is actually verifying all the information, which is a big difference. A lot of organizations are reporting information voluntarily. EMAS is also voluntarily, but you have a public verifier that actually checks all the data that is reported on. I think that's very important in terms of transparency. And maybe also for the image of organization. This includes, of course, that's why I'm saying it, the CO2 emissions scope 1 to 3, among others.
Thank you. Any other question or comment from the audience? I wonder about what can cluster do in this area, okay? You know that the ECCP has created or launched the Towards Green Facility, I think it's the name, okay? In fact, the cluster that I manage, IDEA, is one of the 25 selected for this. So we are going to work on facilitating, first to learn ourselves, okay, but later to facilitate our members' involvement in activities related to the greening of the businesses. And so how can we, apart from helping in the understanding of the opportunities and understanding of the standards and the requirements, what else could we do in that area? What do you think, ideally?
Yeah, just maybe to start. Yeah, it's a good point. Well, you mentioned already the understanding. I think that's a good starting point, of course, possibly to provide workshops and to provide trainings. But you asked also how to go beyond this. And I think, yeah, when it comes to the development of the members inside the clusters, so if there are startups who want to grow, or companies who are already established but still would like to move further, need new investments. But I think here we can look further, also both in public and private, funding sources. So I think also implementation of these environmental management systems, if the cluster is supporting it, so that can also be utilized in the end by reaching out to Horizon Europe funding or linking out to the EU Green Deal, and just also providing this kind of understanding across the cluster that this is possible, that there is this kind of possibilities. And here's also a bit the bridge to the topic that I presented in last autumn. So that is not also going beyond just this awareness, so that there is more than European funding or more than just this public financing, but also that there is these opportunities reaching out to the private capital, meaning really the global investors who are running the large investment portfolios, and because they have lots of interest into sustainability, performances, clusters that link their operations to circular economy, to bioeconomy, green technologies, and many of these great ideas that had been also discussed by many cluster managers and other members in this platform, in these morning sessions. So investors are interested into that, but they often have still difficulty to learn about this. And I think they're the clusters, so also the managing part. So they can also have built this network with these private financiers. So really having this portfolio managers that are having all their screens in New York, Singapore, and Amsterdam, Frankfurt, and so on, and just looking for where can they allocate some capital into green projects, because they're sub-investors, the ones who are feeding these portfolios, they're looking for this. And because we have these movements towards sustainable development. And I think there are large-scale opportunities. And I think here it's really quite new topic. Just we are really somewhat in the starting phase, but it's accelerating very fast. And I think there the clusters can do a lot.
That's a very good point. In fact, Adrian, excellent. Thanks for referring to it. Yes, we discussed it. Yes, on autumn. Yeah. Thank you very much. So, any other comment or questions? If not, I will take the opportunity to comment that we are going to have next week two really interesting sessions again. The first one is in the 18 about the relationship between clusters and the European Enterprise Network. The goal for the new EM consortium is open now, and we are promoting the integration of clusters on those consortia. And in the 20, we announced yesterday we will start with a workshop on how could Europe improve the development and production of therapeutics for COVID-19. And this is not at all, in fact, not at all related to clusters. We are going to speak about companies working on that, okay? So we are collaborating with the European Commission as clusters for sure, and we will use the capacities of the cluster networks. But I need to be clear on that we are focused on helping the enterprises to develop the best therapeutics as soon as possible to be at the disposal of the population, not only of Europe, for sure for Europe, but also for the rest of the globe. So the meeting on the 20th is really important. If you have connections or do you know of companies that are working on that field, don't hesitate to forward them the invitation. Thank you very much, Adrian, Daniel, and everyone, Nina, for sure, for the organization of the event. And I hope to see you soon again.
Thank you too.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you a lot.
Thank you.